again?
I
Right up and echo.
Yeah. I think Mike and I agreed that what would it be most helpful to talk about today? More practical stuff or more conceptual theological stuff?
Yeah, this is a funny thing. Okay, when Randy was saying that last night, that white people are the least likely to get story, then as I'm processing it at 2 a.m., I'm like, wait, J.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, they're white, they write great stories. So maybe we could delve into that, like, what does that mean and what does that not mean? Anyway, so how about you, Brian?
Yeah, I missed a good bit of Randy's talk last night, so I don't feel like I can really address that in much detail. But just with the idea of how story connects to different groups of people, I do think it's true that status quo Americans in general have a difficult time really grasping the meanings of story. If you look at the kind of movies we have and stuff, they're very linear kind of plot lines with very predictable kinds of outcomes. And as a society, we tend to be very kind of commodity oriented. So we're about like production and stuff like that. And we're not so good on grasping people. It's something that we can learn as a society from indigenous culture. So I'd be kind of interested in how do we further empower indigenous culture, because I think it's something that can enrich the society as a whole.
Yeah, there you go, everybody. Brian Grover sharing the wisdom. Speaking on that issue. Great. Andrea Steckel. I apologize.
That's okay, no problem.
You can tell us a little about yourself and where you're from?
I am originally from Rhode Island. I am Narragansett, 15 generations back. I am German American, and I am an ordained, now retired minister.
I'm going to move to the table.
In the UCC, and have worked.
Yeah,
with,
and she's in another session.
We have two people in the same room with different sessions going on. And I am a graduate of United Seminary, which was a program that did have native to native
my partner is
program.
A retired minister, and she's over in the other.
But that was a number of years ago. I'm, like I said, I'm retired. I'm 64 now and live in Syracuse, New York.
Is that better?
Syracuse. Great. Welcome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Arlene Wildman.
Right there.
Hey there. So the original question, is this just an introduction or what?
Yeah, introduction and kind of what you want Mike and me to talk about for the seminar. So.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know everybody. So I'm Darlene Wildman. I'm married to Terry Wildman. Some of you might know him. We have been in Native ministry for about 25 years. And we really had to, Terry is Native. He has a Native bloodline, but he didn't have the culture at all growing up or in his young adult life. So we learned about Native culture together in our 40s. And so we went to live on a reservation on the Hopi Res in 2000 and lived there for about 5 years. And then we've traveled to a lot of reservations and lived around Native people, this whole 25 years. And I'm very white. I even have my DNA tested just in case, but I'm Northern European and that's all there is to it. But I love Native people. I love people of color, and my heart has been for justice and all the issues, and I thought I was doing real well, like interpersonally with people, but this whole Black Lives Matter, the protests and the issues that have just been discussed so much lately, make me think maybe I'm not doing so well. I say things and I catch it later, and I'd like to get to the place where I don't say things where, you know, I catch it before I say it. You know what I mean? So that's kind of why I'm here, because I'm hoping that there'll be more discussion about that kind of thing. And that's unspecific, I know, but that's kind of really, you know, I care so much for people of color, for, you know, the tribes and the different people and the stuff they go through, and how much, you know, white privilege I've had my whole life, and how so much we view the world comes from that white privilege place rather than, you know, the place that people I'm talking to are from. And, you know, just something of being able to be conscious of that, you know, when you start a conversation with someone, you know, I do feel that people that are white in particular, and not to cut out other people that are just non-native, because I realize that, you know, there's lots of dynamics with that too. But in my situation, you know, just growing up white and seeing the world a certain way. And so I just, you know, I'm really excited about some discussions about that.
Thank you. And I hope that you'll jump in and correct Mike and me if we say anything that you disagree with, because you have every bit as much experience and more to be leading this seminar. So I appreciate you being here and calling you to help.
Thanks.
Eric.
We live in Arizona. We live in Maricopa, Arizona, which is south of Phoenix. Not Maricopa County, where the
whole
protesters are counting ballots. That's not us. That's Phoenix. So, okay.
Eric, will you introduce yourself next?
Yes, I'm Eric Seberg. I'm a part-time staff worker with InterVarsity, focusing both on Native ministry as well as spiritual formation and prayer. Yeah, I've been on this journey for a long time.
Yeah.
And well, I won't get into that, but.
Hi, it's Rebecca Tanner. Last night in our group,
Where's that coming from? Is that coming from your speaker, Eric?
Water Walkers, that's
Me.
what we named ourselves. But I'm Rebecca.
Andrew, there you go. Yeah. Okay, so I thought I could go down the list of participants over here, but they're jumping around. So if I miss anybody, please speak up. But Drew Williams, will you introduce yourself next?
Hi there. My name is Drew Williams, and I work with Covenant Youth of Alaska. And me and my wife live in the native village of Scammon Bay, which is, if you draw a line west from Anchorage and south from Nome, where those two meet, is about where we live on the coast. So Anchorage is about 700 miles away. The Russian coastline is about 270 miles away from my front door. So yeah, we work with Native youth. What's that?
What time is it there?
It's dark here. That's outside my window. It's like 8:30 in the morning, so I'm still trying to become human, because it's Saturday. And yeah, so just it's been a long journey for us of just of identity, and we are the diversity in our community. And there's about 4 non-native people who live here year round, and so just navigating that, and you know, there's lots of things there, but I just like these kinds of conversations, and it's good to see and hear where other people are at. And I am interested in discussing Randy's talk from last night. It does things to your head when you hear things, and good and bad there. But yeah, so that's me.
Thanks. It's nice to meet you. Monica, will you introduce yourself? Oh, did I catch you in between?
I don't know, I was still trying to get set up, but I figured out how to fix my screen name. I'm Monica. Friesen is my maiden name. So if there's any other minnows in the room, I'm looking for you. And I live in Algonquin Lands in Eastern Ontario. And I'm just here to listen. My husband is right here.
Hello.
And this is the, you just complained that it was not, that it was on speaker, so I took it off speakerphone. And this is a conversation that has, you know, hit us deeply a lot. So, so I'm here to gain what I can.
Welcome. Glad you could be here. Let me see. Megan says Megan's iPhone.
That's me. I'm Megan Lance, and I've been on this journey since I was 2. My mom comes from German heritage and my dad from Swedish, but then I grew up with the Northern Cheyenne in Langer, Montana. And so all of my first teachers and my first pastor and Sunday school teachers were all Native American. They were all Cheyenne. So it's something that was just normal for me growing up. But then as I went off to college and in my young adult years, I realized that that wasn't the norm. And so I've really wrestled with a lot of identity pieces around that, centered around that, and have discovered recently that I'm considered a third culture kid. And so I'm really just wondering what my place is in the Native world and in the white world, and also now in the Latino world as I work as a bilingual educator with Latino children in West Chicago. And I'm part of that context where there are some of my students who do have indigenous roots in Latin America, and so are not always understood in that context either. So yeah, so I'm really interested in this topic.
Nice to meet you. Kathy, will you introduce yourself next?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I love the weekend Zoom conference vibe. My kids might come in picking their nose any moment. Who knows what could happen, but thank you. And I just want to bless and honor Will and Mike. Thank you for creating the space for us to talk. Yeah, my name is Kathy Haug, and I live in Iowa and serve with InterVarsity, overseeing student and faculty work in Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri. And yeah, I think I would a little both, and I'm so curious to hear how people are processing last night's content, as well as certainly looking forward to hearing stories and from learning from the experiences of you all as leaders and in the room about your work. Just have a heart to see, and many of my non-Native staff in these 4 states are desiring to serve more Native students as well as tribal colleges in our context. So thank you for this space. Good to meet you all.
I'm glad you're here, Kathy. Kiara, or is it you told me last night, but I forgot. Is it Kiara or Kiara?
Kiara.
Kiara.
Yeah. So I'm Kiara Fair, and so my married name is Mennonite. I'm in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, in Canada. So we're kind of above the Dakotas, right in the center of the country. And yeah, I'm here I'm InterVarsity staff in Saskatoon here. And yeah, Rachel, who's also in this group, we've been invited by Megan, and we're just happy to learn and kind of learn on behalf of our whole organization too. So yeah, I joined this session. In Canada, we don't, right now anyways, we don't really have like a specific Native ministry or like anything like that. And in our own fellowships here in Saskatoon, there's not a lot of representation by Indigenous students. So yeah, it just feels like a good place for me to be right now. And I'm happy to learn about like more the bigger concepts or practical. So I'd be happy to sit under any teaching this morning. And yeah, we're waiting for a snowstorm here. So last night when I went to bed, there was no snow, and it's been snowing overnight. But we're still waiting for like a really big storm coming tomorrow. So I can keep you guys updated on that.
And it's dark in Alaska. It's Rochelle.
Hi. It's actually pronounced as Rachel.
Rachel. Okay.
Yeah, Rachel. Yeah, and my last name is Lau. So Kira and I work together. I'm actually her supervisor. So I work for University Canada. I'm the Saskatchewan director. I also live in Saskatoon currently. I'm originally from Malaysia and I moved to Canada. Well, I moved to Canada 13 years ago, but I moved to Saskatchewan 10 years ago. So yeah, I oversee the Ministry of University here in this province. I'm very much just open to learning. So recently Megan and I got connected. So I think both is a personal journey of learning, but also kind of holding like the movement of our organization as we move forward, of what it means to kind of like invest and learn more deeply around Indigenous, non-Indigenous relation. And yeah, similar to Kira, sitting down and waiting for the storm to kind of come in. We'll see what happens this weekend.
Well, you get to keep your internet connection and can stay with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see, Mercedes.
Hi, yeah, so my name's Mercedes. I'm originally from Omaha, Nebraska, but right now I'm finishing up my senior year up at North Dakota State University in Fargo. So yeah, I first got kind of like introduced to and interested in Native ministry. Actually, a couple summers ago, my church went to the Pine Ridge Reservation for a week, and that was kind of my first introduction. And then summer of 2019, I went and did nations up in Cake, Alaska for 6 weeks, which is primarily the Tlingit tribe. And so, yeah, that was really awesome and just learning. And yeah, so I'm just kind of here to learn and yeah.
Great. Well, welcome. Hi, Luke. Introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Luke Schmall. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm on staff with Crew and just have the amazing privilege of working with nations, the very specific Native ministry of Crew, mostly helping leadership do operations and events like WJEF. I get to be a part of the design team for this as well. So I learn a ton through the process, but it's like I still, I'm not doing ministry on campus with students. I'm doing more administrative and business type things, but I just want to continue to engage in learning how to be in good relationship with natives and anybody actually, but especially because I'm working with this ministry to continue to be humble and a learner and wanting to engage with people in a good way.
Yeah, Luke is the guy that makes it happen. We would not be here without Luke's hard work. So thank you again this year for the work you put in. Okay, and the last person on my screen, it just says McDonald's. And there's no picture. Do you know who you are, McDonald's? There you are.
Hello. My name is Lori, and we live on Kwakwaka'wakw territory on Vancouver Island in BC. My heritage is Scandinavian and German. My husband is Korean Scottish. So I grew up, my parents were in Native ministry in the interior of BC. So similar to some other people, it's something that I grew up with, but more recently, I'm realizing that I still have lots of attitude that I need to change. So lots of learning, considering that I'm married to an Indigenous person, it's something that I can't avoid it. So yeah, and we're also in like my whole married life, pretty much, we've also been in Indigenous ministry. Right now we're with Indigenous Pathways, iEmergence. So that's something new for us, but it's been going pretty good.
Great. Great. Mike, I suppose we ought to introduce ourselves. I'm Will Krischke. I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma since last July. This is a new place for us. My wife is Megan Krischke, who was on screen last night. Probably most of you know her. She's InterVarsity's National Director of Native Ministry. And I'm the InterVarsity's Area Ministry Director for Oklahoma. We moved here hoping to start new Native American ministry in Oklahoma. We were in Colorado. We've been doing Native ministry with InterVarsity for 14 years now. So that's my experience as a white guy in Native ministry. Like some of you, a white guy married to an Indigenous person. So it is a bicultural, cross-cultural marriage. We were talking this morning about that and some of the ways that plays out. And I've been trying to learn what it means to be white in Native ministry for a lot of years. I don't have it figured out, but maybe there's some things I can share. Some of the things that Randy said last night didn't surprise me, but I can remember hearing them for the first time and having questions about that. So that's kind of just who Randy is. He's going to bring it that way. I've learned a ton from Randy Woodley. So, hey, Mike, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Mike Kelly. I work with Nations, which is a part of Crew. It's Native ministry. I've been doing that for over 15 years now. Yeah, I live in Bozeman, Montana. And my wife and I work with students that come from around the reservations in Montana, some from other places as well. We've been doing that for quite a few years. And let me tell you, I've learned a lot, but most of it's by, kind of by the pitfalls that I've fallen into and been able to get out of and continue to learn. But yeah, this is really, to be honest, a tiny bit intimidating because there's a lot of people in this Zoom room right now that just have so much that I can learn from, I'm sure, as well. So I really appreciate all those of you guys coming and excited about the conversation that'll come as a result of this. So the first time I met Randy Woodley, I was with Richard Twiss in Portland, and we were heading to get something to eat, and Richard Twiss, who's just always very positive and nice, and goes, "Hey, meet my friend Mike. He's doing Native ministry, trying to help him do it in a good way." And Randy Woodley said something like, "Yeah, he won't last 5 years." So that's kind of like the teaching. Randy Woodley's approach to teaching is, and it's worked pretty good. I've been in ministry for 15 years. I'm just like, hey, I'll show him. I'm going to be in this for 15 years rather than, it's not going to be 5. So yeah, even the story, like Indigenous people are really the ones that understand story, and that white males can't understand it. That's kind of just a challenge right there. It's like, okay, come on, just get under your skin a little bit in a really good and fun way that's just challenging to our thinking. And so yeah, that was anyway, that's my introduction to.
So I'll do a quick just hand raise poll. Raise your hand if you're in Canada. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? I think I'm counting 5 or 6.
What if you're close? I'm fairly close.
Close. And Alaska is close too. Though it doesn't sound like Drew is close to anything. Another one, raise your hand if you work with college students. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so that's about half the room, I'd say. So I have notes for this. They're geared particularly towards college students and how to reach Native college students on campus. But it sounds like it might be best if I just post those and you can look over them yourselves. Mike, does that sound all right? And we have a little more free-form, loose discussion about some of the things that people were bringing up. You good with that?
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, so then I'm not going off notes and I might just ramble. So Mike, please don't let me ramble. But yeah, I think we can talk a little more about being white and what we bring to the table, both positive and negative in terms of this. And I guess I'd start with Randy's, what was it, rule number 5, that white people don't get story last night. I'm paraphrasing that, but it was something like that. What would I say about story? I don't think it means that we don't like stories. I think it means that white, Western, Enlightenment, academic methods and understandings don't have a lot of value for story. We like concepts and precepts, and we like to abstract things. So we use story in a different way. So I think it was Leah who was saying, wait, we have great storytellers in our culture, Lewis and Tolkien. We do, but we relegate them to this level of entertainment mostly. That's something we'll do when we're not being too serious, right? We don't take stories very seriously in our culture. Right? Like if you're reading, it's great to read Lewis, but if you're going to be serious, you're going to read, his theology, not his stories. That's a sort of a white perspective. This is, this isn't innate. It's not something born into us. It's just, it's the culture that we're in. It's the way our culture handles these things. As a white guy, I found that learning like a native way to handle stories, like in some ways it feels healing. It feels like coming home. I step into something and I'm like, oh, this is what it's for. This makes sense. This feels better. I guess the metaphor, the analogy I would use is it's like, we talk about, like you probably heard, like you talk about culture is the water you swim in, and you don't always know it's there because you're swimming in it, right? Until you've been taken out of it or put in something else. And there's some ways that I think the water that we swim in as white people, it's got some junk in it. It's kind of toxic, but we're so used to it that we don't even know it until you get some fresh water or some different water, and then you're like, oh, this is really different. And sometimes it'd be even threatening, that new water, because you're so used to what you swam in. But there is some ways that I think it can be really healing and healthier to find the better water, the cleaner, clearer water. So I think there are some things. There's some stuff from the Enlightenment revolution in Europe that has removed us from traditional ways. A lot of what happened in the Enlightenment was dumping and getting rid of traditional and indigenous ways, even European indigenous ways of knowing and understanding things, in favor of these more abstract, scientific ways of understanding things. Does that make sense? Are we tracking with that? I don't know if this is helpful.
It makes a lot of sense to me, Willie, because in my experience, I'm a bit unusual because, I have very close ties to my ancient homeland and the Sami people there, as well as the ethnic Swedish population as well. And what I've discovered about a lot of white European people in North America and many other places is they've lost. It's not that they don't have story; they've lost their connection to it. And when I was a young man, one of my first journeys was rediscovering the roots of my indigenous past. I spent, I lived in Sweden for a year, discovered ethnic folk music and dance traditions and songs and stories, all kinds of things that were very, very life-giving for me at that time. This is going back to the 70s. But what I've realized is that there's lots of people who have disconnected themselves from that source, and so that they don't know how to even tell their stories. And every culture has poets and storytellers. It doesn't matter what roots you come from. I mean, I've heard lots of storytellers at Celtic festivals, for example, and so I challenge. One of the things I challenge my students with is to find their roots, actually, and if they have more than one, that just means they've got more opportunities to discover life from multiple sources.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think too that what my reaction to the discussion and to that point about story is not so much that like you were saying, Eric, that there is story everywhere in our culture and in the mainstream of Euro-American culture, the story is there. But I think that the message I get is that how important it is not to overlook the stories that we have in indigenous communities. And I think of here in Montana, we have 13 different tribes, 7 different reservations, 13 different tribes. There's over 500 recognized tribes in North America, and each of those have a unique story to tell that can enrich our lives and our culture. But because of mainstream American culture, those are so easily overlooked because they've been marginalized, and so the message I'm getting is just the importance of taking time to listen and to learn and to understand what are those stories. Like when I meet with students, learning their background and their story and how valuable that is. And then I also look just in my own heritage and background of just how in the church, it seems like we're missing aspects of the body of Christ because we somehow think that this template or this theology or this avenue of thinking is really where it's all at. This is how you do Bible study. This is how you do systematic theology. Yet learning from somebody like Randy and from others that are doing indigenous theology, there's so much that can enrich our lives. And then we also understand that it is more of a Hebrew understanding of what it means to be a worshiper and a follower of Christ. And so it really stretched my faith over the last 15 years. And it has challenged my presuppositions of what it means to be a follower of Christ, and has helped me see the beauty of God in ways that are unimaginable that I never would have suspected. So that's my little spin-off of what has been said.
Beth, did you have something you wanted to say?
Sorry, I needed my power cord. Well, I was just thinking, it's interesting when somebody like Randy says a thing. It's just interesting to me that we there's a tendency to sort of accept that he might be sort of a little bit kind of maybe correct. And I think it's a challenge to just say, what if he's right? What if he's just plain right? And that's been one of my, I think part of my journey of, I'm Beth and I work for Nate's and I hang out with these guys and work for them and whatever.
If you don't know Nate's, it's a bunch of PhD theology.
Well, guys like Randy.
Super smart.
Super smart people, yeah.
Smarty pants Indians.
Yeah. I guess like my starting point would be when he says story, I don't expect he means what anyone has just mentioned as a definition of story. Like the difference goes back further, I guess is what I'm saying. The difference in what is what and how is how goes deeper, I think, than I realized for a long time, and probably deeper than I still realize. So even this word story does not mean the same thing. So we talk about a story. Well, that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about story. So you notice that that normally they I say they, I'm just really generalizing, wouldn't say a story. They would just say story, right? The same. So, and we talk about a story. It's a whole different thing. So I just find there's I guess all I want to say is there's layers and layers, and I find it's endless. Like you just think, oh, I get that, that's right. And then you go, oh my gosh, I don't get that, right? And that's been my experience over these many years, is that we fundamentally, that the point from which we depart is very different. And it takes a long, and it's okay that you kind of unpeel the onion and work your way. Like you can't get to that, right? Yeah, there's no direct route, right? But I think sometimes we don't find that point of understanding each other because we think that we're talking about the same thing when we still aren't yet. So we think we're having the conversation about story when actually they're talking about story and we're talking about a story. I mean, so we're still not talking about the same thing, right? And so sometimes I find that can lead to frustration, you know, because it's like, well, what I'm saying is correct, it's accurate, it's true, and yet we're not. But the difference is so profound that I think I find anyway, it takes a long time, maybe a lifetime to actually understand. And some people here are more overlapped than I am, so it maybe you'll live to get to that point before you're gone, but I won't, because it's just such a fundamental difference.
We live in this middle place of learning and continuing to dig in and hopefully to listen better and to ask good questions.
And two, I think the thing is that we tend to have a goal of arriving, right? And part of story is that it's an endless journey. So there is no need to arrive. There is no arrival. There is no arriving. There is no priority. There is no, right? So the whole, like our whole conversation about it, I don't know what anyway, I'll be quiet in a second, but our whole conversation about it is this conversation. And there's another, Randy's whole conversation is this conversation. And there's a little bit of overlap. And I think over time, hopefully there'll be more and more overlap, but we're still not having the same conversation. So, and that's okay. But I think it's good to realize that, because otherwise we tend to talk over it, right? Or to do all those things that we get ourselves in trouble by because we think we're having that conversation oftentimes when we aren't yet. And anyway, that's my experience.
Monica, I was wondering if I could just ask the question. So in light of the topic of this seminar, you know, being non-native in Native ministry, how do you bring that down to, we're meeting with students, we're entering into a community, we're interacting with people, and we're trying to trust the spirit as we go. And how would you bring what you've been talking about down to that experience and that aspect? Maybe you can't, but I that's just what I'm thinking.
Oh my gosh, we have 10 minutes left. I thought we had another 40 minutes. I think we get to stay though. So.
I could answer, but there's probably somebody else that would like to talk, and I've already talked a lot.
Monica, you wanted to offer something?
Yeah. Actually, I've thought about. So I had a brief stint. Beth knows about this. I had a brief stint teaching like cultural safety for nursing students in 2018 and 19. And I know, because I noticed when I was a nursing student that like sometimes they would
I mean, our cultural safety teaching was like pretty abysmal, but occasionally they would bring in elders, and these elders would go to the front of the room and they would start talking. They'd start sharing story with a capital S. Like when I think, Beth, like when you say a story or talk story, I've always pictured story as a capital S, you know, for when you're talking about Indigenous story with capital S. So elders start talking story. But the nursing students were not able to get very much out of it because because story is like a didactic method, a means of pedagogy, you know, that is delivered in a certain way. So if you're a student that has never been taught how to receive story, and then it's difficult for you to get the good out of it because you don't know how to receive it, listen to it. So I was trying to figure, I was like, how could I prep my nursing students better to listen to story? So this is what I come up with. So I'm gonna use my regalia as an example. So in my tribe, we love to wear like lots of blingy like regalia when we dress up for ceremony. Okay, so you have like the elder tells you one story, and it's like a circle, you know, it's like a circle of knowledge. They tell you it's a story, and then they tell you another story. So you added something to the circle, and then you go to another conference and you hear another elder tell you another story. It's added another layer of meaning. You know, you hear another elder tell a story. Oops. You hear another elder tell a story. And everything you've learned is layered on top of each other, right? Like you didn't lose any of the stories when you heard this knowledge. It all came together. So all of this story, they're separate but together, right? They belong together. They became a body of knowledge. But they also remain distinct as what they are. So then, you know, you hear another story. But what if you hear, the same story again? So, and then you hear the same story a third time. So is that unnecessary repetition, or does it emphasize a certain pattern in the knowledge you've received? If you hear a story more than once, does it emphasize a certain pattern within your body of knowledge? It's emphasized, so it's not pointless to have repetition of the same knowledge over and over. There's a reason that elders might tell you the same thing over and over to emphasize a theme in your knowledge. So anyway, so that was my attempt to teach students how to receive story better, so that when they listen, their brains are better prepped to understand what that means.
I want to jump in on that because I think that's one thing I've learned as a white guy. My wife tells the same story over and over. And I used to stop her. I used to cut her off and say, yeah, I know that story, right? Like something would happen in her life and it reminds her of a story of something that's happened to us. And so she'll tell that story. And I used to get really impatient with it and say, yeah, Meg, I know, you've told me that story already. And she'd be like, oh, sorry. And I've learned since then that she does, it's her native culture coming through to repeat the stories that are these guiding posts in her life that remind her of who she is and who we are, that represent our values. And to me, that's part of understanding story as a white guy. My way, the white Western, whatever way, is that a story is a container of knowledge. It's the ice cream carton, and the knowledge is the ice cream. Once I've gotten the principles and the knowledge out of the container, then I don't really have much use for the container and I throw it away. Right? And we can even see that, I think, in our art. And like, we want the movie to have a point. And the more we drive into that, but we really want to know what the point of that movie was. What's the message? Not just that it was a nice story. But for Native people, the story is the point. The story contains all kinds of different knowledge and the different context. My wife tells these stories over and over again because it's not that she's thinking along these lines, but the different contexts highlight different parts of the story and draw different things out about these things that have happened to us and made us who we are. So the story takes on different shades and different meanings being told in these different contexts. And I love that as a white guy, and so I don't do it anymore. I don't stop her. I hear the story again, and I think about it in where we are and what we're going through and how it speaks to the things that we're doing. To make this practical, this has to do with Jesus telling parables and the way we study scripture with students. I think that my early understanding of the Bible was that once I knew the stories and I knew the point of the stories, then I didn't really need the stories anymore, right? I know I've read The Prodigal Son a million times. I know what that's about. I don't need to read it again. But to say, no, maybe Jesus wants to show me something new where I am in my journey through this story that's been with me since I was a little kid. Maybe there's something new here that God wants to speak through this same story, these same forms. There's something new that God's going to draw out of that. And this is a place, and I'll stop talking here in a sec, promise. But this is a place where I think as we engage with Native people and Native students, where we invite them to teach us how to hear story, how to study the words of Jesus. And I mean, the majority of the Bible is these stories that the Jewish people have used to like affirm their identity, be their signposts along the way, to remember. They have these ceremonies that are all about like, this is when we stop and tell this story, which is a really Native thing to do. And so I think our students can help us to learn how to hear stories that way and to revisit these things in different circumstances and contexts and hear what God has to speak to us about it. So
I really resonate with what you're saying, Will.
I see a lot of people raising hands. You're gonna have to jump in, I think. So
I think one of the primary roles of elders in community, certainly in indigenous communities, but in all communities, is to teach story at a very deep level. And the Native students I've hung out with in Wisconsin often will say, we want elders to tell us stories. And that's actually one of the things that's missing from the educational system. Very interesting. They don't cultivate elders.
Darlene, did you want to say something?
Yeah, Terry has been working on the First Nation version for really probably almost 20 years as far as coming up with how to say things and looking at it. I don't know if my husband, Terry Wildman, he's a project manager of the First Nation version translation of the New Testament, which will be published by University Press, I believe in April or May. But it's something, living with Native people, he kept trying to find ways to say, to read scripture that related to them better, where they would have more of a grasp on it. But in the process of doing that, working through the New Testament, we have just really begun to see the people that wrote these books. They're Eastern mindset people. They're Greek and they're Hebrew, and their view of the world and the way they communicate is so not like us. Us as being, Northern Europeans or whatever. And their communication in the scripture is very multi-level. And these stories are multi-leveled, and as you dig deeper, you can see that there's all these layers to scripture. And I grew up in a holiness movement, fundamental kind of church, and it all was so black and white all the time. This means this, and that's all there is to it. And that's such a European viewpoint of scripture, and it's not how it was written. And it's not what it was meant to, to teach anybody. And when you read their stories, because it's all their stories, there's stuff that we can glean and use and take into our lives, but so much of it is their story. And as you look at scripture as being the story of those people and what they were experiencing and learning from the Creator and from Creator Sets Free, who's Jesus, as they're learning that, we're just watching, it's almost like watching a video or a film of their life and what they learned by following Jesus and how he taught them how to be in this world to be the kingdom, the early church, to be the kingdom in this world, and how they were to behave to usher in the kingdom. And you know, so we look at it and we go, okay, we need to behave like that, you know, but it's all told through story. And the stories have so many levels, and some things were cultural and it was really just for them there because that's how they lived and the rules that they lived under, you know, and some of that stuff doesn't apply to Americans right now, but a lot of it does. And a lot what it applies is the underlying stuff, the values and the you know, all the things that Jesus taught, that applies to everybody for all time. And so when you read that story, it's really good to be able to pick out, you know, what's cultural for that time and what applies to the whole world all the time, you know. So that just kind of stirred me to think of it that way when you talk story, because that's the greatest story, and that's the enduring story, and it's the eternal story, and it goes on and on. When you know you were talking about story, and I just thought one quick thing is that you know, when you're with Native people and they're telling their stories, and sometimes their story is what happened to them when they were driving over here, you know, but it's like, you know, they're not in a hurry to finish or make a conclusion, and sometimes there is no conclusion, and sometimes, you know, I'll be in a group of Native ladies and they laugh their heads off, and I just sit there and go, why was that funny? But, you know, it's partly because what happened was so simple and so kind of normal. And it doesn't have a conclusion. There was no lesson learned. It was just, this happened to me. And, you know, they could talk about it for a long time and then they just kind of move on. So, you know, it is kind of like a lot of times when people tell you a story, there's no conclusion or lesson learned from it, supposedly because it's continuing and it hasn't ended yet. So.
Yeah. And sometimes traditional stories feel that way. You're like, what was the point of that? That's my Western like construct, trying to lay that across that and say, wait, that didn't have the parts I thought it should have. Because
we need to have more of a structure, you know. We all got that beginning, and then you have to have the antagonist and protagonist and the climax, and then the ending. You know, it's got to be all cleaned up like that, or it doesn't work. Well, that's only one mindset of looking at things. You know?
Andrea, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I'm actually gonna play advertising. No, I'm not advertising. There's a book called The Tortoise Diaries, which is by Christine McEwen, and I'll put the information in the chat. But yesterday's was a quote from Catherine McNamara. It says, Howard Norman tells us that tells us that in the Cree's garden, the exchange of information is round, and that stories are round. Stories live in certain places. They gather at night and talk to one another. Every so often, a story goes out and inhabits someone for a while. When a storyteller begins a story, it's not by saying, I'm going to talk about moose. About removes the storyteller. He says, I'll talk moose.
One of the things, I think it's in one of his books, but it might have been something I heard him talk about, that I heard Randy say, is that in indigenous cultures, it's not the job of the storyteller to make sure that the listener understands the story, simply to tell the story. And he says he'll listen to elders tell stories, and it's an invitation to invite the Holy Spirit to speak the meaning of the story to him at that time and in that context. So it's a double listening. You're listening to the story and you're listening to what God wants to speak to you through the story, which to my Western mind is really difficult because I just want to analyze the story and find out what the point of it is. So it's an invitation, I think, into deeper relationship even with God as we hear stories. Ray Aldred, who's at this conference, I've seen him do that, tell a story and then just stop and not explain the story. He don't, just leave it there. Let you deal with what you just received, however you will. So.
A little bit, it brings to mind for me some experiences I had with indigenous cultures in southern Siberia and Central Asia, and a lot of those cultures have kind of epic storytelling that's usually in the form of song. And we've been talking a lot of cosmology and how do you understand the story and that kind of thing. And I know for them that there was a much more of kind of a holistic experience around the story. There was like the kind of the plot and the theme of the story, but there was also how it was delivered and what did you feel about the story. And, a lot of times when they would share a song, and these songs were, hours and hours long, like where you were when you were hearing the story impacted specifically how they told the story and what was emphasized in different things. And there was a time when people really wanted to write down the stories and they have them recorded so they wouldn't get lost. And among the storytellers are like, no, you can't do that. You can't just write the story down. That changes the story. You don't experience it in the proper way if you just read something that's written down. And even a lot of times when I would sit with these guys and hear the stories, a lot of times the first time I heard it, they wouldn't tell me like the specific meaning or translation. They were just like, no, you just need to sit with this, feel it, how I've given it to you, and see what comes of it, and maybe we can talk later. So there's this whole different view of how story is communicated. And, as a lot of people said over here, we want to know like, okay, what's the metaphor? What means what? What am I, what's the moral of the story? What am I supposed to get out of it? And, but I think, the story with a capital S, like we've been talking about, is how like, how the scriptures tell us that it's living and active. Like how you experience story changes depending on where you are in life. And that's the power of story, instead of just a story that you get a message from. So I don't know if that really helps anything at all, but that's what I was kind of mulling around those experiences in my mind as I was hearing people talk.
Jump in and poke a little bit at us as white people and how we think about things. I like to joke that white people act like paper is magic, that something's not real until it's written down on paper, and then it's a real thing, which is not. Indigenous are really most cultures in the world and how they understand things, right? Like you get very much into biblical textual criticism, and the big fact that everyone's on is like, well, these stories weren't written down until 30 years after they happened, so we don't know if they're real. We don't know what actually happened because they didn't write it down at the time. And I think if you step back in that into Indigenous perspective and say, they didn't write them down until they had to. They told the stories. That's the way they communicated. The storytellers told about their experiences with Jesus and retold the stories that Jesus had told them over and over in the church for all these years, until those storytellers were getting old and they thought, I guess we better write this stuff down so that it's not lost. I don't think that there was an error or something in the church that happened that it's 30. I don't think that's suspicious. I think that's evidence that these are oral traditions. And writing it down was a secondary way to carry the story to more people.
There's an ancient Sami tradition of chanting that they call yoiking. And it's a way of channeling story that is very, I don't think it's unique to the Sami, but it's because you find it in various forms in lots of tribal groups. But it's a way of, like Andrea said, like channeling and becoming moose or reindeer or the river or the water that you draw life from. When the Sami people yoik, they become what they yoik. And it's fascinated me for years and years now, because I realize it and it's very ancient. It goes back tens of thousands of years. Ethnomusicologists think it's the most ancient musical practice in Europe. But I think I see forms of it emerging in lots of different tribal contexts. even within Celtic people and with Jewish people. There's so many different versions of it, and it's a deep connection with the land and with people and with animals, with this whole universe of beauty. And that's the kind of thing that modern people have cut themselves off from to their own detriment, I think, which it alienates them from the actual creation that surrounds them. But these ancient practices are actually one of the ways in which we stay connected to creation.
Hey, Mike, do you want to jump in or lead us a different way here?
No, I like this. I really am learning a lot just listening, and I guess the thing that does come to my mind is I think of the many students that I work with that are from, they're coming to the university, and they're dealing with a lot right now. I mean, they're worried about their families back at home with viruses. Many of them come from when you think of just their story, there's lots of feeling like their lives have been sabotaged, like there's not much, there's a lot of fear going forward. There's the results of trauma and these kind of things. And sometimes I wonder, just bringing it back down to how do we enter in with this conversation into the lives of those who we can, we're called to minister, and that we want to minister, that we love and care about. How can we bring it home that way, I guess? I don't know if anybody has a response to that. Or maybe we just need to ponder it for many years and see what happens. But
Beth, I see your question about ceremony and campus ministry. I'd say we're trying to learn how to incorporate more ceremonies. And kind of a loaded word. It's one of those things you want to approach carefully and make sure you're not appropriating anything. But in the sense that I think in my life in ministry, helping students recognize rhythms in the school year and where they are in those things, revisiting these stories. I think even in scripture study, to emphasize the story. I hope this makes sense. The story over the text. Sometimes we tend to like really focus on the text. That's my InterVarsity training, is let's analyze this text and draw the connections and conclusions. And I think that's great. You can get a lot out of that. But to kind of turn it back into, let me tell you a story that Jesus told. Let's talk about this. Let's think about this. Or let's remember the story that we told a couple of weeks ago. How is that feeling now? Like, as we think about it, and take advantage of the circular nature of campus ministry, that they go through the same thing 4 times, and say, we've studied this story before, but we're going to bring it up again because it feels like the right time for this story now. So those are some of my thoughts, Mike, is how we make this practical. I did a Bible study a couple of years ago where we just practiced telling the story. I'd read it a couple of times, have them think about it, and then I'd ask them to tell it back to me. And as we told it back, other students would say, yeah, but you missed this part, or, oh, wait, but the character was this way. So we got good at like telling the story as a group together, which I thought was a different way to examine and understand the story as a community. Oh, Rachel, you didn't get to introduce yourself? I thought you did. Please introduce yourself. Maybe it's because I said hi to you. I apologize.
Thanks so much, Will. That's okay. There's two Rachels on the call too, so that could have been confusing. I'm just really grateful to join this discussion. I'm Rachel Kuhn, and I'm of Swedish, German, English, Irish, Dutch, and Swiss heritage. I grew up in Hong Kong and Taiwan and lived in California, Hawaii, Scotland, and now Washington State. So a little bit all over the place, but super blessed and transformed to have spent 5 years in the Native Hawaiian context. And that's transformed my faith, my life, and, you know, feeling discipled by lots of people at NATES also. And Randy Woodley, the latest publication too, has been part of my, you know, recent discipleship. So yeah, just considering also what it would look like to be part of Native ministries in a more significant way in this season. And so I'm taking a job I'm with InterVarsity staff, but taking a job transition in January. So just want to join this conference and kind of get more of a sense. So I just want to say again, just so grateful for what everyone has shared and learning so much from you all. And I know some are Native in this room and some are not, but just grateful to hear from everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, we're glad you're here, Rachel. And I do apologize that I didn't give you a chance to introduce yourself at the beginning. So
thank you, Will.
When I think about this whole thing, and you know, and I really liked Randy's talk last night, and I don't think there's much to disagree with in anything that he said, you know, but it's more the fact of like, there used to be story in Western Europe. You know, there used to be, you know, there used to be these oral traditions and these deep, meaningful, you know, like Eric was saying with Sami people, and I know that, you know, within Celtic traditions and, you know, old German traditions, there's all these things that used to be, but you know, they're gone now for some reason, or they're relegated to entertainment, you know, but they didn't used to be. And we've lost that, or we gave that up, or something. And so there's just all these ideas swimming around in my head of like, man, like it didn't used to be that way. And like we've given up this, you know, I like that capital S story. I think it was it Monica who said that, but and just like, I wonder, and I put this in the chat a while ago, but I don't, not some people are on the chat, but I wonder how much of it is in, as white people, there was a moment in history where we had to become something else, right? Where we moved to a new place. And I know it's a little bit different in Canada, but there was a moment when we came from somewhere to a new place, and there was a need to become something. And to become something, we forsook the things we'd come from. You know, we stopped being Welsh, we stopped being Irish, we stopped being French, we stopped being Polish, we stopped being German, and we became American. We became Canadian, we became whatever, and we killed the story. We broke the chain in that moment. And I don't know, like, it's hard to fix a chain when it breaks, you know, and it's so, and living in a context where the chain's not broken, you know, the chain's not broken here, or it's broken differently. And but trying to be contextual and trying to be relevant, because our students are living in a world no one ever has before. And so, and it's this tricky, difficult thing to navigate, that's it's living too in its own way. And so anyway, those are just thoughts that I'm having.
I think in some ways the mass immigration to this continent from Europe was a physical manifestation of the break we made, spiritually, mentally, and the enlightenment away from indigenous traditions and stories. And I think it's traumatic. And I think that it's part of why so many people started like have this like huge emotional response anytime you want to talk about white ethnic identity, because it's rooted in this traumatic immigration experience that was leaving behind identity to come be something else that was pretty undefined. And I think this is my soapbox, but I think that for white people to really heal that, we've got to go back and deal with the immigration story and reconnect. I don't think it means we have to move back to Europe, but reconnect in some way to who our families are and where they came from, and how that's formed who we are. So
I think that's really true. My family is like multi-generation away from having moved here from Ireland and England in particular. And my mom was always anti those places, and my culture I grew up in was the church. I grew up in this, holiness church culture. And anytime someone would say, "What's your culture?" it was like, well, my culture is we go to church 5 times a week. We read the Bible and pray, and we can read missionary books. TV is very limited. My mom let us watch some TV, but it was like, the only music was church music. There was no dancing, and all those, so that's the culture I grew up in. And it's a culture of like a vacuum or something, it's kind of, there's not much to pull from. And the American culture, as far as being American, well, it's what, baseball and hot dogs? I mean, it's like there's nothing particular that we can really grasp a hold of to say, this is a cultural identity. So for some, European immigrant people, we are jealous of a culture, we're jealous of the fact that someone has dance and music and language and story, because we don't. And I have just recently started, trying more. I've had kind of an aversion to embracing the Irish culture, but I'm so much Irish that, and I have Irish friends. So, it's like I am trying to lean back that way again to understand them, because I didn't understand why people left there. And I didn't understand why their songs are so depressing, because the music is happy and the dance is happy, but the songs are all depressing. And, trying to understand where the pain came from, that they wrote these depressing songs, but see, it's like, I'm someone from a negative culture or a non-culture, except that was this very strict church culture. And I think there's probably a lot of European descent people that have that same experience to some degree, or their immigrant grandparents or whatever wanted to erase the past, so I think in that you embrace this linear thinking, I don't know, even the superiority, that's the right way to do it. I think the superiority probably comes in, this is the right way to do it. And other ways they waste time, they waste money, they're inefficient, and we've been bathed in that. So
yeah, we need to wrap up, folks, whether they're going to close our room on us here. But I think this has been a really great discussion. I appreciate everything that you've brought to it. We have another seminar this evening, but there's lots of other great things to do. So maybe we'll see some of you back this evening, and maybe we'll have a whole different crew. We'll see. So, but God bless, and thank you so much.